On a year-long odyssey, we found forgiveness in the battle-scarred rice paddies of Vietnam and hope in the bombed-out villages of Laos. Defiance in the rebel-infested jungles of Peru and change in the desert prisons of Iraq. We examined the tension between patriotism and economic desperation in small-town America and listened to those who were charged with leading men into battle.
Hello and welcome. That was a brief look at On War, a special six-part series that will air on Al Jazeera English starting on December the 22nd at 12:30 GMT. On War is Josh Rushing's close look at military conflict, its roots, its legacies, and the industries it creates. Over 1 year, he traveled to a number of countries and conducted several exclusive interviews with those affected by each and every aspect of the brutality of war. On today's show, we ask, how well do we understand the root causes of war? Remember, you can join in our conversation with your questions and comments. Log on to livestation.com/AJE, enter the chat room and take part. We also welcome your phone calls on the show. Now, here in the studio with me is Josh Rushing, a 14-year veteran of the United States Marine Corps. He gained prominence in the major motion picture documentary Control Room as the U.S.'s military lead spokesperson during the invasion of Iraq. He made a name for himself because of his outspoken nature in that sensitive role and his conflicts with the Pentagon, plus his subsequent resignation from the Marines. He has also made a lot of appearances as a fresh and critical voice in broadcast and print media. Josh, it's good to have you on the show.
Hey, thanks, Riz. Good to be here.
Fascinating series. I'm going to look on it, through three sort of elements, three parts, though obviously it contains a lot more. But let's start with looking at the causes of war. Now, what I want to do is get the viewers to look straight away at a short clip from the time that you went to My Lai, a place that was a source of a massacre during the Vietnam War. Have a look at this, and then we'll chat. Sure.
They used grenades and killed all of them.
My 6-year-old son and I, we lied down and used the rice to cover us. Then 3 or 4 bodies fell on us.
Until I realized what was wrong.
We bring Ken and Kong together. Ken to face Kong's sorrow. Kong to ask the questions that have tormented him all his life. At first, Ken doesn't know that Kong is a victim. Kong doesn't know that Ken is one of the shooters.
Mr. Kong, I was here that day, back in 1968, when the helicopters landed.
When the soldiers came, they started killing everyone.
Mr. Kong, I was part of the Americans that landed here in the helicopters, and I want to apologize to the people of My Lai.
In Vietnam, we have the tradition that we let bygones be bygones, but in our hearts, we cannot forget.
If I didn't care, I wouldn't have come back. And I know words don't heal your heart, but that's all I can do now.
Josh, tell me a little bit about the background to this, because this is obviously very poignant. He was the only veteran who's gone back to that site since that conflict, hasn't he?
That's right. About 40 years ago last March, a company of U.S. soldiers helicoptered into this village and essentially were given the orders to kill everything that moves. They killed about 504 Vietnamese villagers. None of them were armed. Even the U.S. military admits and claims that none of them were armed. And so I wanted to understand, how do you deal with that, for the rest of your life? Because the truth is, I think with the benefit of time, I may have not done that. I may have been the soldier who said, no, this is wrong, we can't do this. But if you looked at it, almost everyone in that unit participated. And so those guys were drafted from across the U.S., so they're seemingly good young men from all different parts of society, and they all did this. So I wanted to understand, how does war open this kind of heart of darkness? And so we got a list of all the soldiers who were at My Lai, and we called them all. Now, it's interesting because there are almost no survivors from that day. As a matter of fact, the village was called Son My, not My Lai, but Son My has disappeared, and the world now knows it as My Lai. The Vietnamese who were there, most of them are all dead, and those who aren't are walking ghosts who can't escape the memories. And that's equally as true of the soldiers, U.S. soldiers. Only one was injured. He shot himself in the foot. But if you try to find these guys today, a lot of them have killed themselves. A lot of them are self-medicating on alcohol, on drugs. They can't be around people. So it's very difficult to find one willing to go back, but we found one, and we took him back and introduced him to a survivor. And it was I mean, it's very, very powerful, and it's, of course, is in the piece.
I'll ask you a little bit more about that. We've got live station going right now with the chat room with people commenting on the live station. And we just got this question in. Thanks for this, Omar, from live station. Omar's writing in from Canada saying, after leaving the Marine Corps, do you believe that the men you fought with would continue to serve if they knew the consequences and hidden agendas of war?
You know, that's interesting, because I actually begin this series by going back and finding 6 of the guys I went through infantry school with. It's called My Class of 2000. We were the first Marines officers to graduate into the new millennium, and we thought we knew what to expect. You know, the Cold War was over, and we thought we'd be doing a number of missions like Bosnia and Somalia. Little did we know that a year later, 9/11 would turn our world upside down. We spent the next 7 years at war. So I did get a sense of these guys, and yeah, I think they would fight, because they don't fight for the political reason, for the higher cause. They fight for kind of the guy on their left and their right, is what they say. Or as Marine officers, they go to war to make sure that their troops are you know, taken care of and have good leadership. But this is one of the problems.
Well, what has it done to them? I mean, we saw the consequences of what happened to the people of Milai, but what about the soldiers in terms of the burden they carry? What sort of emotional scarring did you see? You said about the self-medicating, the drinking and so on, but those who do survive it, they seem to be as harmed from this war as much as those who actually get shot and killed.
They are. You know, like I said with Milai, I don't think anyone walked away that day. You know, everyone that was present at that village on that morning, no one was actually left. Everyone left there either dead or a completely different person. It was interesting when I talked to my class of 2000 guys, they're so close to the war, they're still trying to understand it. And then Ken, who went back to Vietnam, he's a generation later. And he said to the Vietnamese survivor there, he said, let us teach our children not to do this, not to fight wars. And I thought about the problem is your kids are already at the next war, the next killing field. So it's this kind of cycle. And these guys, like I said, they're not going for the higher political cause. And so what happens is when you have the people who are declaring the war, and there's a big gap between them and the people who are actually executing the war, it becomes really easy to declare war over and over and over again, because you don't have to carry the personal burden that the guys who execute the war do.
Well, now, the people talk about the situation in Iraq as being a reflection of what happened in Vietnam. Based on what you've seen and, you know, looking at those who fought in both, do you see a common experience they've shared?
In a way, I see a common experience that all wars share, and people who are involved in all wars share. I mean, Iraq kind of spurred this series in the sense that I've gone there a number of times as a journalist now, and of course I was there as a Marine before, and I thought, you know, the media does a bit of a disservice in trying to understand war. We get so myopically focused. We zoom in on this one war, Iraq, and what caused it, and the bad intelligence, and the WMD, and all these kind of things, that it makes you feel like these are unique circumstances that created this war. When if you step back and you take a broader look at history, you realize that there's really never been a time of peace on the planet. Every war precedes and succeeds the next war, and the last war. There are 36 wars on the planet right now. So I wanted to try to step back and try to understand it like we try to understand drought or poverty or hunger. I'm not sure I did that. I could spend a lifetime, and I'm not sure I'd be able to understand on that level. But this series does take a broader look at war than just the Iraq War or the Vietnam War.
Now, picking up on what Omar had sent in from the chat room, I wonder, of all the soldiers you've spoken to, are there any who say they were glad they went and fought? They felt that what they were doing was worthwhile?
Every single one of them, to a man. Every single one of them believed that what they did was worthwhile. I think part of it's a coping mechanism. When you've lost, you have to believe that you lost for something. And I think part of it is these guys are, in a sense, are believers. They believe that they were there to help the Iraqi people. They saw, you know, where they actually did help the Iraqi people in their immediate surroundings. Not to say they didn't see the harm that was done to the Iraqi people also, but to a man, every guy I found still supported the idea of the war and what they did at the war.
You know what I want to do, Josh, is we're going to take a break in a minute. Before we do, I'm going to show the clip from Laos where you went to look at the legacy of war. So let's watch the legacy of war, and we'll get to talk about it as soon as we get back from the break.
A cluster bomb blew up at the feet of these two brothers, 15-year-old Sompong and 13-year-old Somsai Kamali. They were collecting metal for their family to sell. Now the shrapnel is embedded in their legs, crippling them. Their parents can see it in the X-ray, but can't afford the surgery to have it removed. A non-profit organization, Mag Lao, has been clearing unexploded ordnance in Laos for 15 years. Mag Lao uses the information on where the bombs landed to help villagers who are still being victimized by the war in Vietnam. Mag helps them work their way out of poverty and escape the subculture of scrap metal scavenging. One reason this border area near central Vietnam was targeted by the U.S. government was that the North Vietnamese army used it to move men and munitions south. But it's the Lao peasants, not the contending armies, who have been held hostage to those battles. It is the biggest challenge Mag faces, convincing people living in poverty that risking death for a few pennies isn't worth it. Here's a perfect example. Remember those brothers who were crippled by the cluster bomb that exploded while they were trying to harvest it? Just outside their home, we encountered their little sister, dragging a bag of bomb pieces.